Hi, I'm Virlana Tkacz, and I direct Yara Arts Group from La Mama Experimental Theater in New York. We continue our virtual series for the Ukrainian Museum on Zinovyi Shtokalko, a virtuoso bandura player in New York in the 1950s and 60s. Today, we'll look at Shtokalko as a modernist poet and his musical experiments on the bandura. At the top of our show, you just heard Shtokalko's atonal etude. You'll hear more of his music later. First, I'll talk about his poems, and we'll hear some of them performed. Then we will talk to Marko R about Shtokalko's poetry and his publishers. Afterwards, Julian Kytasty will reveal his insights into Shtokalko's experimental music. He'll be joined by Mike Andrec, and they will share stories about the experimental bandura trio in New York, which was inspired by Shtokalko. Добрий день, я Virlana Tkacz, художній керівник Яри мистецької групи в Нью-Йорку. Сьогодні почуємо поезію та експериментальну бандуру Zinovyi Shtokalko з 50-х і 60-х років в Нью-Йорку. Тоді поговоримо з Марком Стехом з Канади про поезію Shtokalko, а далі з бандуристом Юліаном Kytastym про Shtokalko музичні експерименти. І до нас прилучиться Михайло Andrec. We have a program with a list of music, everyone's bios in it, and you can download it from Yara's homepage, www.yaraartsgroup.net. Our event is bilingual in that our material is in Ukrainian, but most of us will be speaking English today. Наш вечір двомовний, маємо програмку, але тільки по-англійськи, яку можна надрукувати з нашої веб-сторінки. У нас маленький ритуал. Починаємо кожну подію дзвінком. We have a ritual. We start our show. Welcome to Yara Arts Group, dedicated to the theater and all the poetry, music, and images that inspire it. Today, Yara's not at La Mama, but in virtual space. Вітаємо. Zinovyi Shtokalko was from Western Ukraine. He studied bandura and medicine, and he came to New York in 1952. And if you'd like to know more of his life story, you should take a look at our first two events in this series on Shtokalko, the instrumentalist, and the singer of tales. Shortly after Shtokalko arrived in New York, Miron Surmach, who owned a bookstore on 7th Street, arranged to record him. And he released his record, Marusha Bohuslavka, on one side and medley of dance tunes on the other. Now, they recorded a lot more music, but Surmach never released another record. However, eventually he gave these recorded tapes to Maximyuk, who edited and compiled them into a long-playing record set that was released in 1970. Unfortunately, this was already 2 years after Shtokalko had passed away at the age of 48. Shtokalko had also recorded himself in his own studio that Lelko Maestrenko helped set him up in his own basement. After Shtokalko passed away, Maestrenko made copies of what Shtokalko had recorded. These are the infamous basement tapes, his greatest legacy. When he was deadly ill, Shtokalko also asked poet Bogdan Boychuk that his writings be published. The book was called Na Ukrainach Nochi, On the Outskirts of Night, and it was published in 1977 by Nahori Press in Stuttgart and the New York Group of Poets. The book was co-edited by Ihor Kostetsky, the editor of Nahori, who was part of the generation of Ukrainian writers in Europe after World War II. Kostetsky had worked with Shtokalko and had even helped him come up with his pen name, which was Zinovyi Berezhany. The other editor on the book was Bogdan Boychuk, and here we see him in the white sweater reading his poems to the New York group. And they are really the next generation of Ukrainian writers. Boychuk had not worked with Shtokalko, and according to his memoirs, met him only shortly before he died. The anthology Kostecki and Boychuk edited included poems which they called neproza, or not prose. The first Shtokalko poems are very reminiscent of early Tkacz, and some of them are even dedicated to him, like this one, List, on the left, and that's Tkacz in the middle. And they have the same kind of play with melody of language, and this poem even ends with Tkacz's famous phrase, Lu. And Shtokalko's song of George the Conqueror on the right here is also reminiscent of Tkacz's poems, like, for instance, Plach Yaroslavna's Cry. Shtokalko's Kosmichne, or Cosmic, is very reminiscent of Tkacz's work in the early 1920s, especially his collection, Orchestra of the Cosmos. But Shtokalko's accord, that is chord, takes a step beyond Tkacz and moves towards the visual poetry of the futurist Mikhailo Semenko. Okay. Now let's listen to a recording of an event Julian Kytasty organized at Mayana Gallery in New York in 1998. You will hear the wonderful Olya Kirichenko-Shuhan read 4 poems by Zinovyi Shtokalko, and Julian Kytasty will improvise a response on the bandura after each poem. Let's listen.
Слово. А я писатиму, слова писатиму на дощечки. А дощечки складу я і хатку збудую я для друга, для зубила, для кошлатого бурмила, для хвостатого, для бровка собаки ганкунастого. Щоб він гарчав, галасував, брехав і кусав усякого, кому слово не по слові, словесним словом. Ніччю виповзав із своєї потойбічної дорогівки високий авук. І сховав у темряві кола напруженої думки. Часом насторожено зупинявся. Була мертвецька тиша. Інколи раптом з торчака стрибав вниз і, повиснувши на павутинці, гойдався маятником співчутливого реготу. Консонансами звучить його крок. Він іде, тихий і багатоногий, пихтить спалахами моторів і шепотом кочегарить. Іде, посвистуючи з руками в кишенях, щільно підкотивши комір пальта, шкребонувши шибу ще темного вікна. Іде новий день. Млин. При верболозі й на низу долині горечний млин старість. Потік тюрчить, але навколо млинове вода млинівкою із річки не тече. Вогненне сонце їжачище колючками болото сушить, і немилючий млин пече. А у млині на мішку лягши порожній, кулак під голову поклавши, млинар хропе. Сниться сон свідомим млинареві, за пазухою в нього млин. І камінь млиновий у грудях не серце стукотить, бо млива не приносить, і хліба не буде, бо правди в світі вже немає. Старий млинар у сні ридає і голосно хропе.
Wonderful. Now let's welcome Marko Robert Stech from the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies in Toronto.
Hi, Virlana.
Hi. Tell us when Shtokalko's work was first published.
It's a very good question because it actually gives me a chance to show two different sides of Shtokalko. If Shtokalko, the musician, was a very active performer, he was a very hands-on organizer of his concerts, even to the details, and he was actually very involved in his concerts. As a writer, he was extremely passive. He never made any attempt to have his works published, although he certainly crafted them very, very careful and very well. He never made an attempt to get published, and even the author of memoirs about Zinoviy Berezhany, because this was his other incarnation, the literary incarnation, Ihor Kostecki, said that his passivity was criminal, that it was that Kostecki himself had to intervene and had to get something of Berezhany's poetry published. He tried to publish something in Germany when they were extremely close. They were part of this very ultra-modernist group together. However, the journal Horse, second issue of Journal Horse, where the first poems and the prose works of Shtokalko, Berezhany, were supposed to be published, didn't end up being published. So the first publications of Zinovyi Berezhany's works were actually in German translation. In 1957, Kostecki made sure that his wife, Elizabeth Kottmeyer, a German translator and poet, who in 1957 produced a very interesting anthology of Ukrainian poetry in German translation, included two pieces of non-prose by Zinovyi Berezhany. And as far as I know, these were the only works published during Shtokalko's lifetime. Nothing else, as far as I could tell, was ever published by him. It's only a year after his death that in New York, a anthology Coordinaty, the second volume of anthology Coordinaty, is published, and in it we can actually show the slide of the cover. In this anthology, there is a selection of poems or non-prose by Zinovyi Berezhany, and this anthology was edited by two prominent poets of the New York group, Bogdan Boychuk, who was mentioned here, and Bogdan Rubczak. Bogdan Rubczak wrote a short sort of introduction to it. Bogdan Boychuk was the person who collected these poems. And it was Bogdan Boychuk, together with Ihor Kostecki, both people that we already mentioned, that in the end produced what proves to be the collected works of Zinovyi Berezhany, Na Ukrainach Nocy, on the outskirts of night. We mentioned it already. And it came out in 1977 in Stuttgart. And I would like to say just a little bit about both the book and the publishing house, because it was a very unusual publishing house and very special, even for the many special publishing houses of the Ukrainian diaspora. To me, this one was probably the most special. So this book that came out in 1977 is basically the last large book published by the Nahori on the Mountain publishing house, which was in Germany, which was a private publishing house by Igor Kostecki and his wife, Elizabeth Kottmeyer. They established this publishing house in 1955, 3 years after Shtokalko already left for New York. And although there was no financial basis for it, no organizational basis for it, they managed to publish 50 excellent, fantastic books. They haven't published anything which is low quality, and some of the publications, I will just very briefly mention some of them, were really absolutely well world class and especially important for Ukrainian culture. So in 1955, Kostecki publishes the selected works of T.S. Eliot. He already started corresponding with, working on T.S. Eliot in the late 1940s, and Shtokalko or Berezhany was actually involved in it and was actually influenced by T.S. Eliot's poetry. In the early 1950s, Kostecki started corresponding with T.S. Eliot, got permission for this. We can actually show the slide of these books. We see Virlana, T.S. Eliot, and I wanted to mention the second book, which came out in 1960. It's Virlana Ezra Pound, and this is really quite amazing because in 1956, 1957, Kostecki establishes close contact with Ezra Pound when Ezra Pound is still in St. Elizabeth Hospital in Washington, and he's totally persona non grata. And he starts working on this book of translations. He planned to publish 2-volume set. He was able to publish only volume 1. This is the one that we see. But actually already this volume 1, which was quite large, was for its time the largest selection of translations of Ezra Pound into any language. There's 50 canto and not sometimes in the full and sometimes in fragmentary, but it was the largest selection of Pound's canto and so on. He ended up publishing many more books, Shakespeare, Dante. And for example, I want to mention in connection with Shtokalko, according to Shtokalko, his father, who was a priest in Berezhany in Western Ukraine, actually translated the entire Dante's Divine Comedy when Shtokalko was a young boy. So he was obviously exposed to poetry since very young age. And of course, when we now return to the book now Kraina Noci, this was an extremely important book for Kostecki himself. Kostecki was the closest friend of Shtokalko in the refugee camps after World War II in Germany. And he used this opportunity not only to create a new poet, a new prose writer, because to a large extent, Kostecki believed that especially Ukrainian culture has to be created out of nothing. And for him, the poet or a prose writer who's completely unknown still at that time. And he, with this book, creates this literary figure. It was a great challenge and something that he really looked forward to. At the same time, it was a chance for him to reminisce about their very important time together. And what he says about Zinoviy Berezhany as a poet. First of all, he calls him the first surrealist in Ukrainian poetry. One can question that. Many people consider Emma Andievska the first surrealist, although she started publishing in 1951. Who knows when exactly some of these poems were written by Shtokalko. There was also a very interesting painter and poet in Paris and in Prague, Vasil Khmeluk, who was also writing sort of surrealist things, but definitely Zinoviy Berezhany has very strong surrealist elements. What was also important for Kostecki was the fact that he saw Zinoviy Berezhany as a precursor of absurdism, not so much in theater. Kostecki himself was that, but he was, especially in some of the non-poetry work, some of his prose, or there is also a third category, almost prose, that they have. He went in the vein that later, several years later, was opened up by Samuel Beckett and Yerzheny Ionesco and Adamov and so on. And he's writing it at the time when nobody has heard anything about Beckett or Ionesco. They came on the scene only much later. And what also, what's interesting, what Kostecki says about Berezhany, a poet, that Berezhany is a very foreign, he calls him a foreigner in Ukrainian literature. He says that just like Joseph Conrad is a foreigner in English literature, coming from Polish, born in Ukraine, coming out of Polish language. Here, Berezhany started with knowing Polish much better than Ukrainian. During the Soviet occupation of Western Ukraine, he actually got fascinated with the Russian language, and he got many, many Russian influences into his language. And at the same time, as a singer of these traditional dumas, and also he was very, as Virlana, as you said, was very much sort of influenced by Pavlo Tychyna, he goes to this very quintessentially, archetypally Ukrainian language. So it's a strange mixture of all of these, and the language that comes out is something that is, especially in Kostecki's editing, sounds very properly Ukrainian, but at the same time sounds foreign. Something is strange about this, the melody of the language and so on. So this what he found very important. And Kostecki ends his essay on, very, by the way, brilliant essay on Berezhany, with the statement that the history of Ukrainian literature will not be full without the chapter on Zinovyi Berezhany. And actually, it was picked up, this idea was picked up in the early 1990s. Solomia Pavlichko, who wrote a very important, although very controversial book about the history of Ukrainian modernism. I myself disagree with many things that she said, but at the same time, I recognize very many things, other things that she said. She has a chapter on both Kostecki, separate chapter on Kostecki and Berezhany. And she does consider Berezhany an important poet, albeit a poet that never happened. And for her in general, Ukrainian modernism is something that never really fully happened, which I don't agree myself with it entirely. But one more thing that I want to say about the book and about Kostecki's essay, he writes also about Shtokalko as a person, about his views. He writes about his social ideas. Shtokalko was in Germany, he was heading a very interesting sort of fringe group, which was called Grupa Suspilnego Humanizmu, the group of social humanism, which was very forward-looking, especially in the sort of context of the post-war, very strongly, on the one hand side, nationalistic, on the other hand side, sort of, and a little communist thing. He had this almost modern, postmodern ideas of social development. And he also, there is also another chapter on atheism, on approach to religion. Shtokalko was the son of a priest. However, he had a very, very troubled relationship with faith and with religion. Most of his life, he considered himself fully agnostic, if not atheist. At the same time, he writes about God all the time. So, but what is interesting in Bogdan Boychuk's memoirs, short memoirs about Zinovyi Shtokalko, that at the very end of his life, when he is on his deathbed, he becomes reconciled with religion and with his father, because he actually accepts the last rites and has confession with a friend of his father. So it's the sort of a completion of this process of his coming back home.
Well, thank you, Marko. Now we'll hear one more poem from the reading at Mayana Gallery in 1998. The poem is called Molitva, the Prayer, and it's read by Ola Kirichenko-Shuhan, and the music is by Julian Kytasty and Mike Andrec.
О, ти, що існуєш поза самим існуванням, що над найвищими вершинами і під найглибиннішими глибинами, що по той бік найвіддаленіших обріїв Вселенної, що поза початком і кінцем усіх часів, поза схопленістю всіх просторів, що у всьому, що тільки коїться, твориться, росте та рівне, що сам нескінченність, сам безмежність, по той бік усяких вартостей і цінностей, що виростаєш понад усі найпарадоксальніші парадоксальності буття. Скажи, навіщо існуєш ти? І навіщо існую я?
Thank you. Now let's welcome Julian Kytasty, the master bandura player from New York today.
Well, it's very interesting to hear that, Mark, about Shtokalko's literary work. It was maybe a little unexpected for those bandura players who know Shtokalko only from those 1952 recordings that he made for Surmach. This, of course, was the music that he brought with him from Europe. It's maybe a little bit less surprising for those who know the basement tapes, the music that he created in New York. By the mid-1950s, just a few years after coming to the United States, Shtokalko had won his right to practice medicine in New York State. By all accounts, he was a very dedicated physician and worked long hours serving the poor, immigrants, and really what we'd call today underserved populations in Brooklyn, the Lower East Side, and Harlem. His patients, some of whom had trouble getting out all those East European consonants, called him Dr. Shtok. Obviously, this left him less time for music. So in these days, he performed very rarely, but he continued to record and to document his creative process. So the later part of the basement tapes is recordings that can be considered first drafts or studies or sketches. And I think that's where their value is really for bandura players trying to figure out what it was that Shtokalko really did. In this episode, we focus on one little snippet of the basement tapes. These are two instrumental pieces. We heard the first one at the very beginning of the show that he recorded on March 29th, 1957. And he called them atonal etudes, number 1 and number 2. And what they show us is that in his New York period, Shtokalko was searching for a new contemporary musical language for the bandura. And he was looking for it not by adapting music from outside the bandura tradition. The atonal etudes are in no way covers of Schoenberg or Webern or any of the 12-tone composers. But rather he did this by amplifying two aspects that were already part of the deep bandura tradition. The first was improvisation, which was an essential part of the performance of Dume, where you had to constantly adjust the melody to fit an improvised and irregular in terms of line lengths and so forth text. The second aspect was Shtokalko's understanding of the bandura as a modal instrument. Now, a mode is essentially an arrangement of pitches in a scale that creates relationships between those pitches by putting some notes a little bit tighter together. For example, our standard, the standard major scale that we know, and do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Those pitches are, some of those pitches are closer together in terms of pitch than others. Do, re, mi, but then mi, fa, mi, a very small interval, a semitone. Then ti, do, another semitone. And semitones will pull very strongly one to the other, and a lot of a lot of the music we hear uses, most of the music we hear, almost all of it uses this idea. Now we're used to this standard major and minor mode, right? But those aren't the only ones possible, even with the basic arrangement of pitches that you get on, say, the white keys of a keyboard. If you use a different tonal center, the semitones will fall in a different place in the scale. And you get a mode which music theorists sometimes call the Phrygian. If you start on the G here, you get the Mixolydian mode.
Mixolydian? Wait a minute, that's like the Beatles, right? They used Mixolydian in a bunch of the songs, like Paperback Writer and all those great songs.
So yeah, well, at this point, you're in this great big world of modal music and world music. A lot of the music all around the world is based on modal ideas rather than the keyboard-derived harmony of Western music. Now, if you retune a string or two, whether then you get what's called a chromaticized mode. Kobzari did this all the time. For example, typical Duma melody. And by retuning a string or two, you change the pitch relationships in your scale a little bit further. And Shtokalko studied this aspect of the music of the Kobzari quite a lot. He knew the scales that they used for Dume, for humorous songs like my and Shtokalko's favorite tune from the repertoire of Ostap Berezhany. Let's see, where is it? And once you've retuned a bandura, once you've tuned a chromaticized mode, because of the nature of the instrument, it's right there under your fingers. You don't need to change fingerings. You don't need to look anywhere for the strings. And you can ornament to your heart's content, just and you get some pretty cool sounds that way. So it was a very natural experiment for Shtokalko to see what the instrument would sound like and feel like if he tried some different retunings. So the scale that he uses for the atonal etude number 2 is he changes two notes in the scale. Right, he raises one note, and do re, do. And you get this kind of almost bluesy sound here. He lowers another one. And all in all, he creates a scale that has 4 semitones in it. So what that means in practical terms is that you can play almost any combination of notes and it'll lead to almost any other combination of notes. Well, this obviously makes it great fun for an improviser. So at this point, let's listen to an excerpt of Shtokalko's atonal etude number 2.
Beautiful. Now let's welcome Mike Andrec. We heard him on the Mayana Gallery tape with Shtokalko's Molitva prayer poem. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
So, when did you first start working with Julian?
Well, I first met Julian back in 1986 when I was still in high school. I actually came to New York City from Ohio to participate in a folk music course. And during the course of that, I got to know Jules, and among other things, I made a bunch of dubs from the Shtokalko basement tapes. And both the traditional stuff and the stuff we've just been hearing now. And our relationship continued from there. I considered Julian one of my primary teachers, along with Viktor Mishalov. So I had a student-teacher relationship with him, and then that grew into a collegial relationship of two musicians, and also we've become good friends. So and it was in listening to those recordings, like especially things like Atonal Etude number 2, that it really sort of opened my ears to possibilities. So among other things, in the course of our student relationship, at one point, Julian assigned me a sort of a project where I transcribed the second half of, well, I ended up transcribing the entire Berezhany pro Ilyu Muromtsia, which was featured in, I guess, your previous broadcast. And then I also transcribed the atonal etude number 1, the one that you heard at the beginning of the program today. And that kind of started getting me a feel for how he was using this way of thinking. And it really was, for me, it was sort of eye-opening, or not so much eye-opening as it gave me permission, or it felt like, so the bandura in many ways has been, at least in the past, has been kind of, particularly through much of the post-World War II history in the United States, in the diaspora, was sort of this sacrosanct thing. It was like this symbol of Ukrainianness that you like had to like treat with reverence. And I really wasn't into that. That wasn't quite my thing. And to me, the bandura was just a musical instrument, fundamentally. I mean, yes, it had a musical instrument with an important history and important role in a culture, but in the end, it's a musical instrument. And it was hearing what Shtokalko was doing with it that really kind of opened the door. It was like he opened the door to the possibilities of what the bandura might be able to do. So.
And Julian, he did much more than just open the door, right?
Well, Shtokalko opened a lot of doors, in different aspects of his work. He didn't really, he doesn't seem to have, judging from the rest of the tapes, to have really followed up very far on the atonal etudes. Although you see traces of that work, certainly in the accompaniments for the Berezhany. But the fact of the recordings existing, as Mike says, it really opened a door for those of us who are looking for new approaches to the bandura. And by the time that Mayana recording was made in 1998, we were already starting to work together with a third player, Yuri Fedensky, in what became the experimental bandura trio. There it is. And you'll
with
note
a dedication to Shtokalko, right?
Yes, that's our liner notes are essentially telling the story of that March 29th, 1957 recording session. And with the trio, we had a chance to work for a couple of years together and to really explore what was behind that open door. Part of our work with the trio was picking up right from atonal etude number 2, taking that tuning, seeing how it worked under the fingers, how it worked in our ears, how it worked if we were trying to play together instead of just one at a time. If we were, if there was, and we, how it worked to make improvisation a large part of our music making, as it was for Shtokalko. So really our work with the experimental trio was very much, I see it very much as a continuation of that particular direction, and also a way of, this idea that I'd mentioned before of developing a new music for the instrument out of the things that it already did, you know, out of going so deep into a tradition that that it became modern, so deep that you could transcend it from inside.
Yeah, and for me, it was that the whole idea of using the modal aspects of the bandura, really, that was eye-opening for me because it was so natural. So back in my younger days, my form of rebellion, instead of playing rock or heavy metal or something like that, my form of rebellion was playing 20th century modernism and later Philip Glass. So for me, it's really hard to like play 12 tonal serialism on a bandura, like Schoenberg or something like that. It just doesn't work. It's just technically extraordinarily difficult because of the way that the instrument is set up. But by using these chromatic modes or synthetic scales, as I sometimes call them, that gives you access to many possibilities that imitate those sorts of sounds without being 12 tone. And that then led me full circle into thinking about the ordinary do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale and treating that, instead of treating it harmonically the way we're used to hearing it, but treating it modally. So it actually influenced me around full circle.
Yeah, and you know, we found that there was a lot of stuff through that open door. And once you gave yourself permission to go out there and explore, you could do all kinds of things. You know, for me, that meant a lot of collaborative projects with people who played music from all over the world, with musicians from Mongolia and Kyrgyzstan and from Africa and from China, who all played instruments that came out of deep traditions of their own. And through the work that we've done with the trio, it was possible for me to very easily and quickly find a common language with any of these players.
So maybe we could
now.
Maybe we could listen to something from the EBT tradition here.
Oh, yeah, we haven't done that yet, have we? Yeah.
No, that would be so great.
I blew right past that. So yes, so let's listen to just a little bit of the work the experimental bandura trio did, coming right out of atonal etude number 2. It's part of a piece that we called Dr. Shtok Makes House Calls. And let's listen to it.
So that's a part that Mike led the other two, you and Yuri, in improvisation, right? In this section. And you started talking, Julian, about the other projects after the experimental Bandura trio CD. So what were the other things you started doing? I know you did some stuff with Bandura Downtown series.
Yeah, well, we did all kinds of things with the Bandura Downtown series at the Ukrainian Museum, which is really this is part of in some ways. And but also, of course, I did a lot of the theater work that you know very well about with the Yara Arts Group, but also other work that had theatrical elements, like working with modern dance and working with more recently working with also with visual artists, like our wonderful art director here, Waldemar Klusko. And that's another whole open door that we have opened very gingerly, and are wondering what's behind that.
Yeah, so maybe we can watch now one of your collaborative projects with Klusko.
Absolutely.
Julian, what do we have next for our Shtokalko series?
Well, next time we'll have the last of these 4 episodes on the music of Zinovyi Shtokalko. And we're going to go back to looking at the music which he's best known for, his performances of the traditional Kobzar Dume. And this is also going to be the beginning of another project, which Virlana will tell us about.
Yeah, so it's also going to be the kickoff for our next series, Yara's World Epic Festival, with Shtokalko's Dumas as the first thing. We've also have coming up special events with Kyrgyz epic singers and Boryat throat singers who also perform epics, and the Finnish Kalevala and more. And anyway, as always, let's hear for Julian Kytasty and Mike Andrec and Marko R and our visual designer, Valdemar Kusko. Thank you. And thank you, Darian, for running our tech tonight. It's exciting as always to get on Facebook sometimes. Give us a wave there. Okay. And of course, a big thank you to our sponsors, New York State Council on the Arts, the Bandura Downtown Project, and all our friends at Yara Arts Group. We rely on your support, so folks, stay healthy. We have a theater program for tonight's events, which you can download from our website, and tell your friends about our events, and you can listen to the recordings anytime of the past events, and we have easy links on our webpage, www.yaraartsgroup.net. Our exit music will be experimental bandura trio's Kobzar Trance, and it was actually recorded on the same equipment that Shtokalko recorded his basement tapes, and it was recorded by Lelko Maestrenko. I'm Virlana Tkacz. Thank you and good night.